If it's not hockey, certainly the Wizards are going to linger longer at this point and the residue of the NFL draft. But the local little rivalry that has been stoked over the last dozen years or thereabouts, the Orioles and the Nationals, two here, two there. Everybody's running around first place. The Mets are in disarray. The AL East is all up in arms with Aaron Judge fever. And this guy does all things Nats. He is a Nationals blogger down in D.C., and he came to my attention because he's one of the few dudes out there that actually covers where all the mass and money is going. His name is Justin Howard. He has a site called halfstreetheartattack.com. He also has a blog at Half Street Heart, and he is one of the more astute Natitude fans out there that I found on the web, and it's a pleasure to welcome him back in. You know, we don't do this often enough, right? Like in a perfect world, I guess they'd be in the same division, and we'd be going back and forth and playing, 14, 16, 18 games a year instead of playing like Tampa or somebody. But this is the way it's sort of sliced up, and a couple times a year we get together. God forbid they should be mixing the Johnny Holidays and the Rick Dempseys on the Mr. Angelos and Sons network, but this is good baseball right now. We can honestly say, dude, from the beginning, for a lot of years, it didn't look like it was going to be good baseball between these two teams.
Well, yeah, and we're fortunate to live in this area, and I know that the Nats and the Orioles, you said the word rivalry, but I really think there are a lot of fans in the area that root for both teams. Probably more so in D.C., the D.C. area than up in Baltimore, but I think there are a lot of people, and they probably won't want to admit it to their friends who despise the other team, but I think there's some crossover there. So these games are interesting. You do see some people in the stands with the Orioles hat and the Nationals jersey. That seems sacrilegious to a fan, but I think they're out there.
Well, I mean, this is what happens when you get birthed into the Cal Ripken era and you give way, and Camden Yards is still a place you may want to go take a day trip, and you might want to do it when the Nats are playing if the weather holds up and it's the right time of the year. I mean, I remember when these games were always in June, right? They had that rotation, and now the American League and the National League are all over the place, quite frankly, and they could be playing at any point. I do sort of like the home and home thing that it sort of hangs on for a week. This is an interesting time of the year. I mean, the Orioles just got done playing a lot of division games. The Nats got done playing a lot of division games, and I don't know that these teams are going to meet every May and both be thinking about 600 and 700 ball, but that's where we are right now. There's plenty to talk about for both of these franchises, in addition to, you and I discussing where Mr. Angelos' money's going and how it affects the Nationals. We can get to all that, but the bottom line is this is a good year and a good era, I think, and you better sort of smoke it all in and drink it all in, because this Bryce Harper thing and this Manny Machado thing, it's going to take on a new life over the next 18 months, and I think Weeder's going down there is also part of that this year.
Well, let's be honest. I mean, these games are never going to mean as much as the Yankee games and the Red Sox games mean to the Orioles, and as much as the Mets games mean to the Nationals. I mean, this is what it is. It's an attendance thing. It's a chance for Orioles fans to see their team in a different park and don't have to drive very far, and vice versa. So really, it's a novelty. It's something that once a year you get to play your neighbor, but it doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, there might be some bragging rights if one team sweeps the other one, but for the most part, this doesn't have the same effect on the standings as the games against the Yankees might have for the Orioles.
It has a little bit of an exhibition quality, right? I mean, it still does, even though you want it to mean more than that. It's sort of a kiss on the cheek and you move on, and you don't see each other.
And we've had some classic games, some walk-offs. We've had that crazy comeback the Orioles had years ago at Camden Yards against Jordan Zimmerman, that game that Ryan Zimmerman hit 3 home runs, but the Orioles managed to come back. I mean,
dude, I took a busload of people down there. Like the first year, the Nats Park was open, and the Orioles lost on a walk-off in like the 9th inning. I tend to try to forget those things or who the pitcher was, but they're. I mean, and that's when both teams were going to scuffle to win 75 games, and we feels like it's been a long time since that's happened. It always feels to me like the Nationals, certainly enter opening day as more like a 95 or 100 win team, but the Nationals have taken on that Capitals role of being a massive disappointment in the postseason.
Well, the Nationals have, for the past 4 or 5 years, entered the season sometimes, a couple of those years, prohibitive favorites with huge expectations. Coming with big signings of Max Scherzer and coming into the season with rosters that looked loaded. And it's interesting to see the Orioles have had the same amount of success as the Nats. But it seems like every year they come in, maybe a little under-projected because they don't have those big names. They don't have the Harpers and the Scherzers, but they've been managed to hang in there. So it's been interesting to see both these teams over the past 5 years kind of reach the same place through kind of different means.
Thoughts about where this team is? I mean, I look down at the stats, and bro, I'll be honest, man. I don't watch the Nationals. I mean, I can barely keep up with the Orioles for the Capitals and the Wizards and the Brigade and the NFL. I mean, there's only so many hours in the day. I mean, I've sat around watching hockey in the middle of the night. I've watched Golden State play in the middle of the night. But quite frankly, these games go on simultaneously. I can't sit here and say that I've seen 9 innings of Nationals baseball. Then I look up and I see the rotation and I see the pitchers we're going to be seeing this week. Whether it's Gonzalez and Scherzer and Strasburg and even Cole now emerging. This is an impressive group. I mean, I don't think there's anything you can look at with this baseball team from an Orioles perspective and look over there and say, the Nationals probably have the better team, and probably at the end of the year, the Nationals have a better chance of winning 100 games than the Orioles do. But all that being said, it really is anchored around this pitching and, this whole Strasburg era, right, of having this incredible pitcher that came through your system that you managed to keep around and you sort of Humpty Dumpty him and put him back together. Look, the Orioles Humpty Dumpty Tillman. He's back out there on Sunday looking okay. That's a big part of this because I think if Strasburg was my pitcher, I'd always be holding my breath, right?
Well, the starting pitching has been the anchor of this team since they first kind of burst forward as contenders back in 2012. And Strasburg has been a big part of that. Obviously, Gio's been there for the length of it. Max Scherzer has been worth every penny over the past 2+ years that he's been here. But yeah, it is the starting pitching that's really makes you, as a Nationals fan, you can relax as much as as a fan is capable of relaxing, knowing that, over the next 5 months, they're going to have this rotation that's going to throw out a Strasburg every 5 days and a Scherzer. But you bring up a good point. Strasburg, you're always sitting on the edge of your seat waiting for that trip to the mound from the trainer, which we've seen so many times. And, obviously he had the big Tommy John surgery, which was, heavily publicized 5 years ago. But he's had several trips to the disabled list. He missed the postseason last year. And you always kind of sit there, hoping that maybe this is the 1 year that he's going to make it, all 6 months, avoid that DL trip, and he's going to get the Cy Young votes. But that's kind of the price you pay for having a guy like Strasburg. He's one of those guys.
Well, we can look up and down and say, look, we know a little bit about Matt Albers around here. Certainly, I knew Jason Worth before he was worth it, quite frankly. I remember him as an Oriole draftee 20 years ago now, going back before he looked like Jesus Christ and all that. And, of course, Matt Wieters was going to be the next Jason Worth, the next, a Maurer with power and our next Johnny Bench. And lo and behold, here he comes back on the other dugout as a member of the Washington Nationals group. So there's plenty of sort of inbreeding going on here, right?
Well, Wieters has been a pleasant surprise. He's been part of kind of this explosive offense, at least over the first month plus. But the name that caught my attention was the Matt Albers. He wasn't an Orioles superstar by any means, and he wasn't expected to be a big player on this team or any team this season. But he's kind of emblematic. And a few minutes ago I talked about the starting rotation. I can't talk about that without talking about the back end, which is the Nats bullpen. And you're right. This is an impressive Nationals team, but this is the Achilles heel. And we knew that going into the season. It has been so far this season. Sunday was a huge blown opportunity to sweep the Phillies. Matt Albers gave up a 3-run home run to kind of blow that game. But this bullpen is a problem. And if there's anything the Orioles fans feel optimistic about coming in, for this week, it's the game is not over. It's never over because they don't have the horses. And,
so it's like a Caps game, is what you're saying. It's never over.
It is. In there's no clock in baseball, so I mean, it is not over till it's over. And the Nats just don't have anybody. It's shocking how bad this bullpen is for how high the expectations are this year, and they're not succeeding because of this bullpen. It's clearly in spite of as well as they've done. They should have done better if they had at least one or two guys that could close down those eighth and ninth innings. And what happens from here on out, they're going to have to make a trade, and I think that everyone expects that to happen. Whether it's going to be tomorrow or a couple months from now, they're going to have to lock down this bullpen because it is atrocious, and there's really no other word for it.
Well, if they're going to be competitive for sure, and part of this is in the division they're in right now, bro, and especially with the Mets running around with Matt Harvey doing something so horrible, so unspecified that they're going to throw him off the team, and now we're going to have grievances. Ooh, boy. I mean, if that's your number one competitor and you've already got a 7-game lead in the division and we're not, we just ran for the roses 48 hours ago. Wow. I mean, they could really run away and hide and still have deficiencies, especially if Ryan Zimmerman's going to hit 440 this year and, Harper's going to hit 400. I mean, it really is kind of uncanny. The good parts of the team will hide the bad parts, especially when you're not going to compete, because I don't know who's going to come get the Nationals right now in that division.
Well, I think the luxury the Nationals have is time. And, if they don't have another team that's keeping pace, at least right now, and the Mets, like you mentioned, are a disaster, at least so far. And the Braves are still rebuilding. The Phillies are still rebuilding. The Marlins just don't have the guys. They have time. There's no pressure to trade, and give up your best pieces in the farm system right now to get that closer. They can wait a couple months. They can wait for it to shake out. They can maybe sit back and hope that maybe they've got lightning in a bottle, maybe some, a AAA starter. They can throw them into the bullpen, and have like a Zach Britton situation where, a minor league starter becomes a lights out bullpen guy out of nowhere. So really they can sit back and wait. And that's mostly due to the fact of they've got this incompetence in their division. And, the Orioles don't have a luxury like that. They're going to have to keep pace. It looks like from here, they're going to have to keep pace step for step with some of their rivals. But the Nats are in a good position, at least from the standpoint of, maybe relaxing as much as a baseball team can relax during the season.
Dude, I don't remember, and I've been watching baseball a long time, and I've seen some great starts, and I've seen some guys hit the cover off the ball. I don't remember anybody coming into Camden Yards in May, batting .435 with 13 bombs, and, ridiculous slugging, 900, and this sort of Babe Ruthian, Barry Bonzian on, jacked up. This is a crazy thing Zimmerman's doing right now, right?
Well, yeah, I can't believe we made it this far without mentioning Zimmerman, because he's the banner headline of the season so far. I mean, when you look at the Nats lineup, and Bryce Harper is hitting at where he was hitting 2 years ago when he was the unanimous MVP, and Ryan Zimmerman leaves him in the dust. I mean, he is head and shoulders numbers-wise above what Harper's done. What Zimmerman's doing is an MVP. It's almost a historic level, at least from the first 6 weeks of the season. Ruthian and Bonzian are not crazy things to say. I mean, those are the numbers he's putting up. You can't argue with the numbers. There's going to be regression. I mean, I don't think anybody expects him to hit 65 home runs this year. But for Nationals fans who, Ryan Zimmerman to the old school Nationals fans, the guys that were there from the very beginning, 2005, Ryan Zimmerman is the guy. He was the Nationals' first draft pick ever. He's a local kid.
He was the first guy you got your jersey on the back before when Bryce Harper was in diapers, correct? Yes.
He's the guy, and he was really, for the first 5 or 6 years of the team, he was the only reason to watch. And he was, this good kid who, was local, said the right things. He was an all-star when the team had no other all-stars. And not only that, he wanted to stay in D.C. He re-signed once, and then back in 2012, he said, "I want to stay here my whole career. I'm not going to wait for free agency. I want to be a National, and and that's kind of the dream for any franchise, much less a franchise that really didn't exist until 2005, at least in its current form. And he's Mr. National. I mean, he's the guy that has represented this team from the beginning. So it's great to see him put his career back together and not only get back to the level he was at when he first came up, but just surpass that. And it's kind of a dream for Nationals fans to see this because he's not only a great player, he's a great player that you're emotionally attached to.
All right, man, let's get into the meat and potatoes of why you and I chat and how I found you. I mean, I've written at length about Mr. Angelos and the Peter Principles. You know, my wife got cancer 3 years ago. I've had you on the show a handful of times over the course of time. And you're one of the guys that, like myself, there's a handful of us that follow the court cases. And I think if you're a Nats fan, first off, you know, a lot of the Orioles fan base has been anesthetized to all of the dealings of Masson and where the news comes from, and we really can't afford Manny Machado and all that. The bottom line is the Orioles could afford Manny Machado a lot more than the Nationals could afford Bryce Harper if it stays the way it was. Now, they're now fighting in well over in excess of $300 million up in the New York Supreme Court. It's not reported on much. It's in some hearing behind some closed doors. They had another thing a couple weeks ago. But, you know, at the end of this rainbow is the money that's going to finance Bryce Harper and or Manny Machado or whomever comes after that. For these franchises, there's a lot of money at stake, and I'm sort of blown away that, you know, all the money that goes into bringing these teams here, and we see the NFL scab being ripped off where stadiums are getting built or not getting built by public financing and teams moving around. And, you know, the one baseball team that moved was this team. They moved into this backyard. Angelos has pocketed all of the money so far, but the Nationals and Major League Baseball and the partners have been trying to get at it for a decade. And I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I know it's going to affect Bryce Harper and Manny Machado. It's going to have a profound effect on these franchises, and the fact that people don't follow it is shocking to me because it really does have a lot of interesting elements as I see it.
Yeah, it's hard to know how to begin to unpack this mess, and it really is a mess. And there's so many levels to it. There's the business level that most fans don't get into, which is how do teams finance themselves? How do where's the TV money come from? You know, how do they budget for payroll? And then there's kind of the level that the fans relate to, which is, you know, am I going to get to keep Manny Machado? Am I going to get to keep Bryce Harper? It's all tied together.
But you don't have to peel that onion back far to figure out where the money from Max Scherzer comes, or, you know, when the team says we can't afford it, we can't afford Chris Davis, or in the Machado case. I mean, both of these zits are going to pop in the next 18 months, right? And these guys are either going to stick around or they're not, or fans going to be scratching their heads saying, how do you let our best player go? You know, and that's a great question for any fan base. I mean, they're asking that in Oklahoma City about Durant, but at least in the NBA, it's sort of, you know, it's more of a beauty contest there. In baseball, I think the franchises, fan bases everywhere expect them to keep their stars somehow.
Well, what it creates is something that any business, no matter what the business is, you don't want uncertainty. And that's what we have. We've had this dispute dating back years. And, right now we're at the appellate level for a lower court ruling about the compensation from the Orioles to the Nationals. And as long as that case goes, we're going to have that uncertainty. And you threw the number $300 million out there. That's what the Orioles owe the Nationals. And that's over a 5-year period, about $60 million a year, which is not a lot, actually. When you look at TV money, paying $60 million a year.
Let me stop that again. $60 million is not a lot of money in your mind because other teams are getting 90 and 100, 110 and 120 million. And Angelos has basically choked the Nationals franchise, as well as his own franchise, by the way. And keeping the money away from the teams keeps the money out of the shareable pool, which is why it's got the other 30 owners pissed off, or 28 owners pissed off at this point and involved in this. And it's a lot of money. I mean, this is not an insignificant kiss on the cheek. It's $60 million a year we're talking about over the course of a decade. I mean, you know, at some point, it's very hard to argue that the Nationals have not been cheated financially here. I mean, you know, whether you agree that Major League Baseball agreed to that 12 years ago or not, but what has gone on here has not been fair. I just can't say that.
Well, it's, you know, the deal was there when the current ownership came in. I mean, this was to go way back, 2005, 2004, when the team moved to DC. This was the arrangement because it was better. You know, Major League Baseball badly wanted to move the Expos to DC, and this was the easiest way to pay off Peter Angelos, was to set up this Masson arrangement where he owns the rights to both teams and provides a fair value market to the Nationals.
Well, there's your question right there. Fair market value. Who decides that? And,
Well,
Tom Boswell wrote that day one. Who's going to decide? If you go back and Google the Boswell story, he said, who will decide what is fair? Peter? And, that was his question, and here we are 12 years later, and Peter thinks Peter should decide what's fair.
Well, and the problem is that the whole financial landscape has changed since then. The Masson deal was developed and designed during the Yankees, Red Sox, Nesson era, where the team owned the network and started to broadcast, and that was kind of the birth of this kind of huge windfall of cable TV money. In the past 10, 12 years, cable sports have just become enormously valuable. And this is in every sport. I mean, this is basketball and baseball, and the NFL has billions upon billions, and that's just because of TV rights. And what appeared to be a lot of money back in 2005, this Masson setup, has really kind of been surpassed by, you see teams like the Phillies and the Diamondbacks, and even smaller market teams like the Padres are signing these billion-dollar deals because cable TV has been so profitable. And that's kind of that was the poison pill in the Nationals' original contract, was that the Orioles were to provide a fair market value to the Nationals. Now, the fair market value back in 2005 is way different than what it is now. When you look at what the Nationals could get,
teams were getting $18 million, $19, $20 million a year in that era. It was 12 years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot.
And there was no reason to believe that it would be more than 30 or 40 million moving forward, and that's where Angelos, really clamped down in 11 and 12 and said, "I'm going to give you 34 million." And Major League Baseball said, "No, you're going to give him 65, and then you're going to give him 78, and then you're going to give him 88." And that number sort of got amplified by the time we get to 2016 or 2017, and therein lies the rub. That money is sitting in Mr. Angelos's bank account, and everyone's trying to come and get it, right? I mean, that's and whether they're going to get it or not remains to be seen, right?
Well, that's part of it, because I think when you really look at Masson, Peter Angelos is probably not getting as much money as he could, in that if the Orioles own their TV rights and the Nationals own their TV rights, the combined amount of money for each team put together would be more than Masson is currently bringing in now. So when you look at what is the fair market value, I mean, the Nationals could probably get over $100 million a year in TV rights if they were to sell them on the open market to CSN or whoever, or Fox Sports. Now that if Peter Angelos were to give that amount, that fair market value, which is what the Masson contract calls for, Masson would go bankrupt because they're not bringing in the same amount that the Nationals and the Orioles would get if they independently sold their rights.
Well, they've been a horrific network when it comes to eyeballs, selling advertising, and creating something above and beyond, here's the game beginning in April. I mean, they don't even run the exhibition games. I mean, every other team's exhibition games, primarily, 80, 90% of them are on television because they're trying to sell tickets for the season. Not putting Nationals games on in March does not help the Nationals sell tickets in March.
And the Nationals have adjusted accordingly. I mean, they have made every effort to monetize their stadium and their suites and wherever else they can get money, not from cable TV, because they know that they don't control that. They're going to go to court. They're going to fight for what they can get, but they're the only team in baseball that doesn't own their TV rights. So they're going to do what a good business does, which is go find money somewhere else. And if you were to look side by side, of course, these teams will never show us their books, but if you were to look at how much money the Orioles bring in from non-TV revenue and how much the Nationals bring in, I guarantee you the Nationals blow the Orioles out of the water just because that's the way their business has been designed for them.
And
how they're gonna
Angelos
get
would
their money.
say going in, and this was the part of, over his dead body in 1997 when I chatted with him, would there ever be a team in Washington? I mean, anyone would look at this and see the size of Baltimore and the trends in Baltimore, even 10, 15, 20 years ago, and say a team in Washington, it goes back to Edward Bennett Williams, would be more valuable than a team in Baltimore. I mean, that would be true for the Redskins. That would be true for a baseball team. Be true for anything. And certainly the amount of revenue that comes from more eyeballs and from a more affluent fan base and from a larger region when you're talking about Northern Virginia and the Maryland suburbs, the tonier Maryland suburbs in Montgomery County and Potomac. There was always going to be more money for the Nationals. I mean, from the minute they were born, unless they were a complete Cleveland Browns kind of train wreck of a franchise, and they've been anything but, that they would be more profitable than the Orioles. And that was one of the arguments to keep the Nationals out of Major League Baseball, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously he was scared of that. But back when they were talking about moving the team, I mean, the context matters. The Yankees were a juggernaut. The Red Sox were a juggernaut. And Peter Angelos saw that he would just be forever dwarfed by these two teams. And that's why he originally gave in to the Nats moving, is because he had this Masson package. And he thought that would ensure that his team could compete with the Red Sox and the Yankees. But I think
then he didn't spend any of the money, really, and now the last 7 or 8 years, part of the excuse is, well, these people are coming to take my $300 million. I can't just go out and willy-nilly and, spend the way the Yankees and the Red Sox are spending, even though he's made that kind of revenue. And keep in mind, all the money that leaves the television side that goes to the team, that's money that also has to go to the Nationals. I mean, that's part of the poison pill. Whatever the Orioles get, the Nationals would then get, which would mean that if the Nationals get $35 million, theoretically, the Orioles would have to get $35 million, which theoretically would mean a third of that would go into the pool and be split amongst the other 28 teams. So, Peter's got a lot of reasons to fight and a lot of reasons to want to keep this money on his side of the fence, not just because it's his money. It's because he'll even have to split it by a third twice on the National side and the Orioles side if he starts dispensing of said resources. So this is really, it's so complex. I understand why fans don't get it, but it's such a unique story. It's almost like a murder mystery. You know what I mean? It's almost like putting all these pieces together takes years, and it really is not something that I can explain or you can explain in an elevator ride, right?
Yeah, it is incredibly hard, and I think a lot of fans have tuned out. And if you just look at web page clicks and
right,
Twitter
sure.
retweet, some of these much we have to see what fans care about. They don't care about this stuff, and they just care. How's my team doing?
They're going to care when Manny Machado doesn't re-sign, right? I mean, if the Nationals win all this money and Peter has to write a $280 million check to, literally, if that happens, I don't know what happens to the Orioles at that point. I mean, I'm pretty sure Peter's counting on that money at this point, and so are his good-looking sons.
The other piece of this that we haven't hit on is there's the money the teams get from selling tickets and various other revenue, and then there's the TV money, which of course is what they're fighting about. But the other thing that's been completely different from back when Masson was originally designed and the Nationals moved to DC was the centralized revenue in Major League Baseball has exploded too, and that's your national TV money, your MLB.TV. Major League Baseball has they've developed Major League Baseball Advanced Media has, for as much as we give Major League Baseball a hard time for being behind the times, as far as internet streaming video, they are way ahead of everybody else. And they actually have a business that they have a revenue stream through Major League Baseball that's split to all 30 teams of streaming content that has nothing to do with baseball. They'll produce, music shows and other, lend their technology to other sports. Disney purchased a third of that entity, Major League Baseball Advanced Media, and it is bringing in billions every year. And that's money that's split equally. It's hard to get the exact numbers, but somebody told me that each Major League Baseball team in the next couple of years is going to get $200 million a year before a single ticket is sold or a single dollar comes in through their own local cable TV contracts.
And yet some teams will still have $60 million payrolls and say,
exactly.
no speaky, and I don't make any money, and my name's Jeff Luria, and I'm going to sell my team for $1.8 billion. Well, that money's not coming from Mr. Bush and Mr. Jeter on some sort of speculation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
they're printing money. The Miami Marlins are printing money to be worth $1 billion.
It doesn't take a genius to figure out when you're willing to spend $1.2 billion, and this isn't Derek Jeter buying it because the Marlins would be cool to own. I mean, he's bankrolled by bankers, by Wall Street guys that know what they're doing,
and not Russian bankers like the president, like real bankers, like American.
Yeah, like real bankers,
right?
And they know, the revenue that comes in yearly for the Marlins, and that justifies a $1.2 billion price tag. That should tell you something. We don't know the exact numbers, but that's a big wake-up call. I mean, these teams that, just to give you an example, when the Nationals moved to D.C., Peter Angelos was terrified that the value of his franchise would plummet because he would lose all the D.C. fans. He would be this small market, small Baltimore team, tiny.
I know where you're going with this. I love this one. I'm going to sit back and get some popcorn because I know what you're about to say.
This is great. He had built into the contract that he signed with baseball to allow the Nationals to come to D.C. that there was going to be a minimum franchise sale price. So if he got out of the Orioles, if he got out of the baseball team owning business, and he sold the team for less than a certain amount.
It was $365 million, which was twice what he paid, and it was to increase, I believe, $10 or $15 million per year. For all those years.
He was thrilled that there was this, it's like, when you buy a house saying there's no way, you're going to sell this house for less than this amount and it's over what you paid for it, you're happy. But when you look at the franchise, I mean, if you were to sell the Orioles now, they'd go for if the Marlins went for 1.2, the Orioles would at least go for that amount. I mean, it blows that.
Not to mention how much he siphoned off the network, which the learners are trying to go get right now. Like, when I write about this, it's an otherworldly story in that there's no precedent for this other than maybe that Kentucky and the St. Louis ABA franchises, right, where those dudes are getting, 1 point off of $1 billion NBA business into perpetuity. I mean, it was a crazy deal they've had since 1975 that people have written about. They've made $600 million. It's an insane amount of money that they've made off of literally a bankrupt basketball league with a red, white, and blue basketball. Angelos, for his money, and this was the moral of my story, right? One of the reasons I wrote the Peter Principles is I'm getting older now. I had my press pass taken away after 11 years ago, and I've tried to sort of make sense of it in my own mind, in my journey, and having seen all of this and almost losing the Orioles to Washington and Edward Bennett Williams and watching the Colts leave here and seeing my dad cry and seeing, William Donald Schaefer get the stadium built and then, having to go fight with expansion and trying to get a football team. This has been my life's work to understand this as a fan because I think every Baltimore fan who's my age has seen everything my eyes have seen with these franchises. And it really is amazing how much the man has wrecked the franchise for the fans here and how much money he's made off the $34 million that he brought into that courtroom in 1993 because, this is a $3 billion operation over the last 15 years. And the thing that he did not want ever to happen was the birth of the Washington Senators, Nationals, whatever they were going to be. That was the one thing he never, ever, ever wanted to see happen. And it happened, and it's the thing that saved his ass. Because he was so upside down in 2005, $175 million upside down. All the boxes were empty. The stands were empty. He was doing those David Segui, Jeff Conine deals, still trying to compete with the Yankees with a $90 million payroll before McPhail came in. And the thing that has enriched him more than any other decision, other than buying the team itself, was the fact that the Nationals exist. The Nationals existing and his fight for that deal made him more money than he ever would have thought that he would have made in asbestos or mesothelioma or certainly in buying a baseball franchise that all he really wanted to do was be famous, really, and be loved.
Well, it's the best, over the past 10 to 15 years, it's the best business investment in America is owning a Major League Baseball team. It's just, for whatever reason, cable TV being in the right place at the right time. I mean, look at Jeffrey
Well, it's a bit of a heist, right? Like, there's no other business where everybody in said region pays someone and doesn't even know they're getting the product, right? I mean,
well, that's the reason. I mean, every time you pay your cable bill, you're paying for Masson, whether you watch Masson or not. And local baseball does do well, as far as cable TV viewers go. I mean, most markets in the country, baseball games are, if not the highest, one of the highest, nightly viewed programs.
But if people had to check a box that said, I will pay $3.84 this month to have baseball games, about 6% or 8% of the people actually who in this area would actually check that box. I mean,
Exactly. If only people that watch the Orioles or watch the Nationals paid for Masson, the money wouldn't even be close. And I think that we're going to see that bubble burst or deflate at some point, because it's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to slowly happen. And it's cord cutting. And if you look at ESPN, they made big news when they released 100 employees, some of them very high profile, highly paid people. They're concerned about the business future of cable TV, and they should be, because people are just not, the younger generation especially, they're just not paying for cable. It's too expensive.
And they're never going to pay for it.
And they're never going to. And that's kind of the bigger thing. It's not that they're not buying it. It's that they never plan on buying it. And
remember when the Washington Post and the Sun was running around 15 years ago thinking, well, you'll buy a newspaper, damn it. Now they know you're not going to buy their newspaper. And obviously the cable TV companies know that they've reached the zenith. Like, this bubble's going to burst. And Angelos has been in the right place at the right time with all the money. And Lerner knows that, and he's coming to get it. I mean, and so did Bud Selig, and so does Rob Manfred. I mean, they know how much is in the collection plate, for sure.
Well, I think – you look at newspapers as the example. The question isn't, what happens to newspapers. What are they going to replace their lost money with? So there are fewer people buying newspapers, the actual paper, and they're reading it online. Are they going to get the same amount of money? The answer is no. I mean, because advertising online is a fraction of what it is, or what it used to be, in the actual paper itself. And I think that it's going to be the exact same thing with cable TV. Right now you have millions of people across the area, subscribing to Masson, mainly because they have to. Because if you own a cable package, you own Masson. If it's kind of a direct-to-consumer thing where you either, buy Masson, the Masson app on your Apple TV or whatever the replacement is to traditional cable, it's going to be a fraction of it. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to the business. Obviously, newspapers did not survive. They're still alive, but they are a shell of them former selves, and several local papers around the country have gone under. I think you're going to see some difficulty with baseball, and it's not going to happen overnight. But I think as the money goes down and some of the bills come due, I think the era of huge payrolls and these kind of big contracts and windfall profits and $1.2 million sales prices, even though it's the Miami Marlins, I think that eventually will go away, and it'll be interesting to see. And I think the fans are going to suffer, because there's going to be some shakeout. There's going to be some teams cutting back, trying to fight the tide of rising payrolls. I think the era of work stoppages eventually. I should say the era of no work stoppages will end, and I think we're going to have a strike, lockout. There's going to be some kind of fallout from this changing business model. It's not going to be good.
You know what, man? And it's going to be fun to catch up with you every couple times a year on all these issues. It's been great having a visit with you. It's been lingering longer. I haven't reset, man. This guy here has a blog. He's a Nats fan. You were a recovering Oriole fan, though, right? I mean, you grew up an Oriole fan.
Well, I grew up in the 80s, 90s. Watching Cal Ripken, the Orioles, going up to Camden Yards. So I wouldn't say recovering. Sounds like there's something wrong with rooting for the Orioles back then. But that was the only team in town. But obviously having a team down in D.C. has been better than I could have imagined.
He has a torn and tattered Walgreens hat, from what I can tell, out at his blog. It's Half Street Heart, and halfstreetheartattack.com. Why Half Street Heart Attack? Why the heart attack?
It was we started the blog right after 2012 when Drew Storen blew that save, and it was it was.
I was on a bus. I was on a mega bus after the Orioles lost in New York in Game 5. In the most unlikely, the Orioles were in a pretty good little run right then, and during the Miguel Gonzalez era, if you remember, in the Nelson Cruz era, and I was on a bus in the middle of New Jersey watching that meltdown, and Look, I don't hate the Nationals. I mean, I guess I do because of my tour a couple years ago. But, I'm a Caps fan. I'm enjoying the Wizards. We can all agree we hate the Redskins up here. But the Nationals, they've all been kind of cute. And I guess from an Orioles perspective, they've been kind of harmless because they've never won. But one of these years, I mean, and certainly the way they've loaded up, and with Zimmerman hitting 440 right now, and Bryce Harper, and even, of all the signings that happened last year, the Daniel Murphy thing's been unbelievable. I mean, there's a guy there that his career's been really, really fascinating to leave New York, right? I mean, that's a guy we haven't talked about at all on your camp.
Yeah, and he's been great. I mean, he's the Mets let him go. They really had no interest in bringing him back. They thought that October explosion that he had back in 2015 was a fluke, and it's not. And he was a late bloomer. But when you watch him play, I mean, the guy that I think of when I see him play is Wade Boggs. Just with his ability to drive the ball to every field, the ability to make contact, he avoids strikeouts, he doesn't slump very often, got a little bit of power. I mean, he really is fun to watch, and he's a great example of the Nats have gotten very fortunate with some of these guys that they brought in, and that lineup. It's interesting that we went this far without mentioning Murphy. That's how good the lineup is. You have to talk about other guys, and then you get to him, and he was an MVP candidate last year, and he's doing the same thing. It really is a dynamic, explosive lineup, and it's fun to watch. If only they didn't have the bullpen problem. This would be a perfect season so far, but, both good and bad.
Well, we'll hope they blow 3 of them. Hey, Justin, take care of yourself. He is Justin Howard. It is Half Street Heart out on Twitter and halfstreetheartattack.com. And he's doing all things Nats. And, hey, I can hate on the Nats without hating on their fan base. So we're all in it together with, the Capitals and the Wizards and all the pain and the ups and the downs and the drama. Enjoy the baseball this week. We'll catch up again soon, man.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
You got it. Justin Howard lingered longer there. Nice piece there. Very, very chunky. And one of the few dudes I actually talk to and read and follow out on social media that really understands what's going on with the Masson thing. He writes a great blog out there if you want to know what's going on with the Nationals. And as I admitted to him, I do not watch a lot of Nationals baseball, but I shall this week in the midst of all this hockey and basketball and NFL residue. We also got the Preakness coming up next weekend as well. We'll be doing some derby stuff around here. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox digitally each and every morning at 7 a.m. That's brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Last but never least, on Thursday, we're going to have Dennis Galatzis here. He'll be here from 3 until 5 doing the SSV. That's the Sunday Sports Voice. Now heard on Thursdays. But, of course, Coons Ford and Security Boulevard sponsors that show as well as our tech service for breaking news. And every day there's breaking news with the Orioles because they're sending guys up, bringing guys down. Good to see Tillman battle back on Sunday and get back into the rotation. And we will get the heart and soul of the rotation against the Nats this week. And the Orioles head off to Kansas City. We're going to be broadcasting live on Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook. And we've got our road trips to London, Green Bay, and Nashville on sale now under the Road Trips tab out on the website. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.